In China, as you know of course, the emperor is Chinese, and all of the people in his court are Chinese too. This story happened a long time ago, but that's just why you'd better hear it now, before it's forgotten. The emperor's palace was the finest in the whole world, made entirely of delicate porcelain, so precious, and also so fragile that you had to be very, very careful how to touch it. In the garden there grew the most wonderful flowers, and the loveliest ones had little bells tied on, which never stopped ringing, so that nobody would go by without noticing them. Yes, everything in the emperor's garden was most carefully thought out, and it extended so far that even the gardener didn't know where it ended. If you kept on walking, you ended up in a marvelous forest with tall trees and deep lakes. The forest went right down to the sea, which was deep and blue, and large ships could sail right in under the branches of the trees. In these branches there lived a nightingale, who sang so enchantingly that even the poorest fisherman, who was normally fully occupied with his work, would stop and listen when he was drawing in his nets at night and he heard the nightingale singing. "Oh my, how beautiful," he said. But then he had to get on with his work and forgot about the bird. But the following night, when the bird sang again, he would say the same. "Oh my, how beautiful." Travelers came from every country in the world to admire the imperial city, as well as the palace and the garden. But when they heard the nightingale sing, they all said, "That is the most beautiful of all." When the travelers got home, they told their tale, and learned scholars wrote many books about the town, the palace, and the garden. And they certainly didn't forget about the nightingale. The nightingale was given a chapter all of its own. And those who could write poetry wrote the most marvelous verses about the nightingale in the wood near the deep sea. The books went all over the world, and some of them even reached the emperor. He sat reading in his golden chair and kept nodding his head, for he liked reading all these marvelous descriptions about his city, his palace, and his garden. "But the nightingale is the most beautiful of all," said the book he was reading. "What does this mean?" cried the emperor. "A nightingale? I don't know any nightingale. Is there such a bird in my empire, and what's more, in my garden? I've never heard about this. And to think, I learnt this from a book. He immediately summoned his chamberlain. The chamberlain was so grand that if an inferior dared to address him and ask him something, he could only answer with the words, "Tsing Pei," which of course didn't mean anything at all. There is supposed to be an extremely remarkable bird here called a nightingale, said the emperor. People say that it is the most beautiful object in my empire. Why have I never been told about this? I have never heard about her, cried the chamberlain. She has never been presented at court. I want her to come and sing for me this evening, the emperor said. The whole world knows what I possess, and I don't. Well, I've never heard of her, said the chamberlain. I shall go look for her, and I shall find her. But where was she to be found? The chamberlain walked up and down every staircase, through all the halls and corridors, but nobody he met had ever heard about the nightingale, and the chamberlain went back to the emperor to tell him that was obviously invented by the writers of the books. Your Imperial Majesty must not believe what the books say. It's all made up. It's black magic. But the book I read it in, said the emperor, was sent to me by the almighty emperor of Japan himself, so it cannot be untrue. I will hear the nightingale. She has to be here this evening. She enjoys my highest favor, and if she isn't in here tonight, I shall have the entire court beaten on their tummies just after supper. Tsing Pei, said the chamberlain, and again ran up and down every staircase, through all the halls and corridors, and half the court ran with him because they didn't want to have their tummies beaten. Everywhere they asked after the extraordinary nightingale that everybody knew about except the court. At last, they came across a poor little girl in the kitchen. She said, "Oh, yes, I know the nightingale. My, how she can sing. Every evening, I'm allowed to take some leftover food to my poor sick mother. She lives down there by the shore, and when I'm tired walking back and stop for a rest in the forest, I can hear the nightingale singing. It brings tears to my eyes, and it feels just like my mother kissing me." "Kitchen maid," said the chamberlain, "I will give you a regular situation in the kitchen and allow you to watch the emperor eating. If only you'll take us to this nightingale, for she must appear at court this evening." And so they all went to the forest where the nightingale used to sing. Half the court joined in their quest. As they were going along, a cow began to moo. "Ooh!" called out a courtier. "There she is! What an amazingly loud noise for such a small creature! I'm sure I've heard that before." "No, that's a cow mooing," said the little kitchen maid. "We've still got a long way to go." The frogs were croaking in the swamp. "Marvelous," said the chaplain of the court. "Now I can hear her. It sounds just like little church bells." "No, those are just the frogs," said the little kitchen maid. "But I think we will hear her soon." And then the girl cried, "That's her! Listen, listen, there she is." She pointed to a small grey bird up in the branches. "I can't believe it," said the Chamberlain. "I hadn't pictured her to be like that. How ordinary she looks. She is probably off colour because she's surrounded by so many grand people." "Dear Nightingale," called the kitchen maid quite boldly, "our gracious Emperor would so like to hear you sing." "With the greatest pleasure," said the Nightingale, and sang to her heart's content. "It sounds just like little glass bells," said the Chamberlain. "And just look at her throat going up and down. How strange that we've never heard her before. She will be a great success at court." "Shall I sing once more for the Emperor?" asked the Nightingale, who believed that the Emperor was actually present. "Excellent little Nightingale," said the Chamberlain. "It is my great pleasure to invite you this evening for a feast at court, where you will move and enchant His Imperial Majesty with your sweet voice." "It sounds better out here in the woods," the Nightingale said, but still she went along when she heard it was the Emperor's wish. The palace had been festively decorated. The porcelain walls and floors gleamed in the light of 1,000 golden lamps. The loveliest flowers, all of them carrying bells, were arranged in the corridors. People were walking to and fro, causing such a draught that it made all the bells ring, and nobody could understand a word anybody was saying. In the middle of the great hall where the Emperor sat hung a golden perch for the Nightingale to sit on. The entire court was present, and the little kitchen maid was allowed to stand and listen behind the door, because she had now earned the title of Kitchen Maid. They were all wearing their most beautiful clothes, and everyone looked at the little grey bird. And then the Emperor nodded. And the Nightingale sang so sweetly that tears filled the Emperor's eyes and trickled right down his cheeks. And then the Nightingale sang even more beautifully. Everyone felt their heartstrings touched. The Emperor was so glad that he gave the Nightingale permission to carry his golden slipper around her neck. But the Nightingale refused and said, "I've seen tears in the eyes of the Emperor. That's my richest reward." "That's the best way of earning someone favour," said all the ladies around. They filled their mouths with water so that they could gurgle if they were addressed and sound like a nightingale themselves. Yes, even the lackeys and the chambermaids announced that they were satisfied, and that's saying a great deal because they're not easily pleased. The Nightingale was a great success. Now she would stay at court and be given her own cage, and leave to go out for a walk twice a day and once a night. 12 servants would accompany her and hold her by 12 silk ribbons. There was really no pleasure in such outings. The whole city was talking about the remarkable bird, and if two people met in the street, one needed to say no more than night, and the other would say ingale, and they would both sigh in mutual understanding. 11 pork butchers' children were named after her, but not a single one of them had a nice voice. One day, a large parcel was brought to the emperor, bearing the word Nightingale. "This will be a new book about our famous bird," said the emperor. But it wasn't a book. There was a veritable work of art in the box, an imitation nightingale, supposed to look like the live one, but covered all over with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. If you wound up the artificial bird, it immediately began to sing one of the songs that the real bird sang, and his tail went up and down, glittering with silver and gold. Around its neck hung a ribbon which said, "The nightingale of the Emperor of Japan is but a shadow of the nightingale of the Emperor of China." "Oh, how nice!" they all cried out, and the person who had brought in the artificial bird was immediately given the title Chief Imperial Nightingale Bearer. Now they must sing together. What a duet that will be! They were made to sing together, but it didn't go very well because the real nightingale sang in her own way, and the artificial bird went by clockwork. "It can't be blamed for that," said the master of imperial music. "It is exceptionally good at keeping time and follows my theories exactly." Then the artificial bird had to sing by itself. It received just as much applause as the real bird, and moreover, it looked so much nicer, glittering like a cluster of brooches and bracelets. It sang exactly the same tune 33 times in a row, and it still wasn't tired. The people would have liked to hear it once again, but the emperor said that the live nightingale should sing now. But where was she? No one had noticed that she had flown out of the open window back to her own green woods. "What's this?" cried the emperor, and all the courtiers were highly indignant and said what an ungrateful little creature the nightingale was. "But we still have the best bird," they comforted themselves. And then the artificial bird was made to sing again. So that was the 34th time they'd heard the same tune, but they still didn't know it entirely because it was so difficult. The master of music showered praise on the bird and assured it that it was better than the real nightingale, not only because of its outside appearance with all the sparkling diamonds, but also because of the works inside. For as you see, ladies and gentlemen, and your Imperial Majesty in particular, with the real Nightingale you never know in advance what's going to come out. But with the artificial bird, everything is fixed. That is what will be heard and nothing else. You can explain it, you can open it up and admire the human ingenuity, you can see how the cogwheels are positioned, how everything works, and how one thing leads to another. Yes, yes, we think so too, they all said, and the Master of Music received permission to show the bird to the people on the next Sunday. They should be allowed to hear it as well, the Emperor said. When they heard it, they rejoiced so much as if they'd drunk themselves merry on tea, which is typically Chinese. And they called out, "Ah!" and held up one finger and nodded. But the poor fisherman, who had heard the real Nightingale, said, "It sounds very nice, and the tune is right as well, but there is still something missing, although we cannot say exactly what." The real Nightingale was banished from the empire. The artificial bird had taken its place on a silk cushion next to the emperor's bed. All the presents it had received, gold and jewels, lay around it, and it was promised to be great imperial night table singer. In rank, it was number one on the left, for the emperor thought that the left was his most noble side. That is the side of the heart, and the heart is on the left, even in an emperor. The Master of Music wrote 25 fat volumes about the artificial bird, all very learned and long-winded, with the most difficult Chinese words, so that everyone pretended he had read it, for otherwise he would be thought stupid and beaten on the tummy. And so a year passed by. The emperor, the entire court, and all the other Chinese knew by heart every sound the artificial bird made, and for that reason they came to like it all the better. They could sing along, and that's just what they did. The boys in the streets sang dibby-dee, dibby-dum. Even the emperor sang it. It was really marvelous. But one evening, when the artificial bird was singing busily and the emperor was lying on his bed listening to it, something inside the bird went pop and something snapped. The cogwheels ran down and the music stopped. The emperor immediately jumped out of bed and summoned his personal physician. What could he do? They then brought the watchmaker, and after a good deal of talking and searching around, he managed to put the bird back together again, but he said that the bird would have to be used very sparingly because the teeth on the cogs were worn down, and it was impossible to put in any new ones without spoiling the music. It was very sad. The artificial bird was only allowed to sing once a year. But even that was something of a strain. But then the Master of Music made a short speech with a lot of very difficult words, in which he assured the people that their artificial bird was working just as well as it used to, and then, of course, it did work just as well as it used to. "5 years had passed by in this fashion when the country was filled with a deep sorrow, for the emperor was ill. He was greatly loved by everybody, but it was rumored that he wouldn't have long to live. A new emperor had already been chosen, and the people stood out in the street and asked the chamberlain how their emperor was. "Tsing Pei," he said, and shook his head. The emperor lay on his great bed of state, cold and pale, and the entire court thought that he was dead and ran off to greet the new emperor. The servants ran off to discuss everything, and the chambermaids had a tea party. carpets had been laid in all the halls and corridors, so that no one would be heard walking. That was why it was so quiet, so very quiet. But the emperor was not dead yet. He lay on the bed of state with the long velvet curtains and the heavy golden tassels. Through the open window, high above him, the moon was shining down on the emperor and the artificial bird. The poor emperor could hardly breathe. It was as if something was pressing down his chest. He opened his eyes and saw that it was death that was sitting on his chest. Death had put on the emperor's golden crown. In one hand he held his golden sword, and in the other the magnificent standard. Strange faces appeared all around from the folds of the heavy velvet bed curtains,